Hello again. On this channel, a few times I've made the comparison between Keir Starmer and Maximilien Robespierre, he of the French Revolution. Now, before I continue, I've made it clear that I'm using an analogy here. I don't want any harm to come from Starmer. I don't want any shots in the face or guillotines or any harm in any way. But there are very interesting comparisons. Robespierre was a sort of virtuous, moralistic lawyer who, as time went on and he ascended to the top of the revolutionary government, people started to see through his sort of vacuous values. And when he sort of sensed that, he became ever more tyrannical. And eventually the people saw that he was really nothing but an empty, nasty dictator. And it was a very, very swift and violent end for Robespierre. Now, I see a very swift and violent, metaphorically, politically, certainly don't want it physically, end for Starmer as well. And I made that point many months ago. Ironically, with Robespierre, he he misread French society. He kind of assumed that they'd fallen out of love with God and religion. But it wasn't like that. What the Third Estate had done is they'd come to despise the corruption within the clergy rather than despise religion itself, mainly the tithe, which fell heavily and disproportionately on the poorer classes. And Robespierre tried to create this cult of the supreme being, which was also part of his downfall, as people just saw that this was a sort of empty vessel of nonsense. And you can see the same happening with Starmer. As people started to see there was nothing to him, it was all nonsense. I mean, if you look at the start of his reign, call it that really, using the term, he was talking about public service, returning politics to high levels of standards and so on. And yet he was in receipt of a very wealthy man, capable of buying his own clothes and so on. And yet he was taking all sort of free gifts, spectacles, suits, and so on and so forth. And he was easily capable of paying for himself. So he was always a fraudulent, vacuous lawyer who was masquerading as a moralistic prime minister. And as more and more people started to see that, he started to become more and more tyrannical, chopping down on free speech. We've seen people being arrested, knocks on the door, devices taken. I'm a victim of that myself. We've seen octarians, infirm people being manhandled by the police for expressing concern about genocidal acts. We've seen restrictions on the right to protest and so on and so forth. But let's look at the Mandelson situation. It's very, very clear. What has happened is Starmer, for one reason or another, which seems quite extraordinary, wanted Mandelson in the position of US ambassador, and he tried to reverse engineer, distance himself, give himself deniability, but tried to reverse engineer the process to achieve that objective. And he's tried to sort of put it in the hands of the civil service, and so he has that perceived clumsy deniability where it doesn't really wash, of course, because he can say, or he will say, I was not informed, it's outrageous, I wasn't informed that Mandelson failed his vetting. I think anybody doing some elementary searches could have told him he would fail. And of course, at any point in time, you'd expected this razor sharp, as we're told, forensic mind that took him to the top of his profession to have asked the basic question, has Peter passed his vetting? But he didn't do that because he wanted that deniability. It also shows that we have I've discussed this quite a lot, this sort of vast parasitic malign state. And many people have sort of charted this with reason back to the time of Tony Blair, where he created all this sort of vast array of civil servant machinery and a vast array of quongos, authorities, regulators, and so on and so forth. So nobody's quite sure who is ruling us. Are we being sort of ruled by politicians that we've given democratic consent for, or are we being ruled by bureaucrats, scientists, regulators, and so on and so forth? And the whole system creates this obfuscation where people are unsure of who takes responsibility for what action. The lines of responsibility between what should be the people and Parliament have been blurred and muddied, almost like a scribbled graph, a child scribbling on a piece of paper and trying to follow one end to another to work out where the lines of responsibility lie. And in many ways you can see that in the videos I've shown with my experiences with the FCA, where I've shown how this sort of conflicted regulator-prosecutor model blurs the lines of responsibility and creates the opportunities for obfuscation, which effectively allows the FCA to elevate its own reputation above the welfare of the victims of financial scandals who ultimately fund the FCA. The FCA has no money. The FCA levies money from regulated businesses who raise that money from the fees that they charge their clients. So I've seen it, I've shown it. You look at I've shown you the extraordinary allegations that the FCA make against John, and how it's absolutely impossible to consider those allegations outside the context of the FCA's own catastrophic failures. Same with Woodford, showing you that the FCA tried to engineer a situation where it looked like they were engineering something very positive for clients. It was better than nothing by the scheme of arrangement, but essentially what it did conceal was the FCA wouldn't have had a realistic chance of a case against Link, because Link would have said to the FCA, you had full transparency of what was happening in the Woodford scandal right the way through. Indeed, Woodford was transparent up to the liquidity issues on his portfolios, and Link, when they took their actions to suspend the fund and eventually close the fund, leading to a very bad outcome for clients, would have kept the FCA informed, and the FCA at any point in time, if they thought that consumers were at risk, hence their mandate, could have stepped in and didn't. So, and I would say to the FCA, publish your legal advice on why you took the scheme of arrangement, because ultimately that legal advice was paid for out of money levied from clients. But we won't see that. So you can see how these things happen. There's a few other things I'll draw attention that I've raised in these videos that's worth reconsidering now. One is, I've focused on how there's this trend, particularly in my own instance, where highlighted this appalling trade in children via social services and family courts, children being emotionally sterilised and traded as assets, just like stocks and bonds with private equity owned agencies, and the damage that's doing to families and children. The UK is committing vast child abuse, as we've seen in the rape gang scandal as well, because there's similar patterns there. What I've sort of identified I've made reference to is this trend of private equity sort of hollowing out parts of the public sector, and I described Wes Streeting as a private equity frontman in terms of the NHS. And to be clear, Starmer phrase, this is a process that began back in the 1990s, so it's been through quite a few governments, but Streeting's certainly stepping up. It's nobody wants to say we're going to privatise the NHS, certainly not Labour. So what essentially they do is they're pivoting the NHS to becoming a procurer of services rather than a provider of services, and that's bringing in private equity who want to lock in to those government-backed cash flows that come from that. And whoever's advising the Green Party have become alive to that. I'm sure they've been helped along the way with some information, where they're piecing together the relationship between Wes Streeting and the private equity industry and this trend of bringing in more private equity exposure, with the NHS becoming more of a procurer of services. The other one that I identified is the trend where I said this business with immigration, it's more complicated than what people think, and I sort of suggested I'm somewhat bemused that people expect a wooden top barrister who's made an awful lot of money out of this sort of immigration wave that's been going on for a long time would in any way be a trusted pair of hands to solve it, because in essence he would be turning on his core profession. Because really this nonsense, stop the boat, smash the gangs, that's the push factor, but the pull factor when the migrants come here, and I'm not taking a political stance on migration here, I'm just explaining some of the dynamics. So when the migrants come here, there's vast earning potential from them when they're here, and that's accommodation providers, and of course it's a major part of it is also the legal profession, who are able to take them through a whole myriad of processes and appeals and so on and so forth. So to smash the gangs, you'd have to smash the white collar gangs here as well, and it never seemed likely that Starmer would do that to any meaningful extent, because he would be turning on his profession. And you see that reform, I don't support any political party, I just observe them, be it them Greens or anybody, I don't support any of them, but reform are starting to pick up slowly on the some of the very, very dubious practices of the legal profession and how it's embedded in the migrant crisis. And also you can see that a lot of it is you have this friend, some very dubiously morally positioned legal professions, knowing what they have to put in front of very partisan judges who at early stages of their career were doing the same thing, and they wave it through, and then the whole system works and works and works. In the family court, I've shown with my own instance across these two channels, I've got more material coming, how the same happens again. Judges, again in my instance and many others around the country, signing off falsified evidence to speed through this process of children being traded as assets into the hands of private equity owned institutions. So there we have it for now. Let's see how Robespierre gets on today. Take care. Bye.